Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. My name is Athira, and I am a product manager for Zoho PageSense and also going to be moderating for you today. So while we're at it, I will probably just tell you how you could use this platform. So if you have any, questions, while we are in the webinar, feel free to use the Q&A section on your left panel. Leave a question, and then I will get to them at the end of the webinar, and I'll make sure all of your questions are answered by Abi. And we will also be running some interesting polls that we would want your inputs on. Once I trigger them, they should get displayed on your screen, and take a vote there. And then again, we also have a chat section if you want to make notes of anything or you want to share something, your experiences while Abi is sharing, her insights and her experiences with us. And we also have a reaction section at the end. If you agree or if you disagree with any of our, discussion points, feel free to use that as well. So yeah, my only expectation is let's just keep it as light and as engaging as possible. And of course, I am so excited to have Abi Hough joining us, who's gonna share her insights into why running more tests isn't cutting it anymore, and bringing in empathy into the mix can make all the difference and can make your experiments actually work. So while we wait for folks to join, Abi, do you want to take a bit and just tell us a bit about yourself? And if I may ask, if you have any crazy story that you could share with us while we wait for everybody to join that you've experienced, while you help teams with this kind of stuff.
Excellent. Good question. First of all, hi, I'm Abi. I've been in this industry for too many years to count now, hence the grey hair. I'm sure you'll all feel my sympathy with that. Have I got any interesting stories to tell? No, I guess if you want my origin story as to why I do the work I do in the way that I do it, is I've always had a fascination with humans, right? Why we behave the way we do, why we respond in the way that we do, and the actions that we perform. And in our industry, I think we can very much get fixated on data and numbers and stats, and often we omit the human in the circle that we're actually doing the work for. And just because I'm rebellious, I like to go against the current and the train of thought, and I feel that bringing humans back into it is way more important oftentimes than just concentrating on spreadsheets, etc., which is why I'm quite interested in putting yourself in their shoes for 5 minutes to try and understand their reality and their context when they're coming to your website. So yeah, this might not be your traditional webinar, and I'm not going to apologize for that, because I think a different point of view is always important to take on board. So yeah, let's see how we get on, shall we?
I absolutely love that, Abi. I'm so glad that you're rebellious, because we get to learn from all of your crazy experiments that you do in, day in and out, and everything that you try. So I'm really happy that you're here with us, and you're going to share your experiences and your insights with all of us today.
Oh yeah, I'm looking forward to it. If you wanted a specific example of how crazy I get, on one project that I was working for a client who sold plants, and I visited about 30 garden centres doing user research incognito mode, so nobody knew who I was or what I was doing. I was just apparently buying a plant, but what I was actually doing was spying on all of these users to build my insights up. So yeah, I like to take things to the extreme. Yes.
Oh, wow, that is amazing. May I ask, what were you trying to learn? I mean, what was the experiment exactly?
Well, it was research to form a pipeline of experiments, really. But the client, they didn't really know who they were selling all of these plants to. So I needed to understand who they were in what context they were buying, and just trying to get all those little golden nuggets of insights from overheard conversations, or, you know, casually, literally injecting myself into their conversations as just a random other person buying a plant, to see what their genuine thoughts were in their reality. So not sat in a user research interview, you know, very formal, none of that. It was completely guerrilla testing, basically. So
yeah, that's fantastic. That really does sound very interesting. Because you know, before, you know, I joined as a product manager in this company, I was into market research as well. But for marketing firms, it was a completely different kind of user research. But I absolutely loved doing that. You know,
yeah.
me being in the field. But I think as, you know, I got older, I don't think my body really supported that. So I had to, like, you know, just settle for a desk job. And I absolutely love that now. But yeah,
Oh, come
I
on, you're
think
like half my age, I reckon. And I still love going out there in the field and getting in the thick of it. I
oh,
find it.
trust me, Abby, you don't know. You don't know. All right.
For me, any excuse not to be sat in front of a computer these days, really. So
Yeah. I absolutely love this, Abby. All right. I think, you know, we've given it enough time, and I think we have you know, a few people in, and we'll still have people come in. So I think we're about set. Abby, the stage is yours. You know, thanks for joining, everyone. Abby, take it from here.
And I'm going to apologise now if I don't get this part right. So please bear with me, people. I have three screens here. Sometimes it's difficult to know which one you're sharing. So let's have a look.
Oh, I also wanted to share that Abby has something, you know, really special for everybody here. You know, she has created something which I'm going to share at the end when she's in that particular slide. But yeah, you know, you should stay until, you know, the end for that.
All right. So now I need to check with you. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. And it's the right view. Just double checking. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Excellent.
Go ahead.
Okay. Let's get rid of that. Okay, everyone. Hello, and thank you very much for joining this webinar. It is 2 o'clock in the UK here, and it's raining. I have no idea what time it is for you guys, but I hope you've got better weather. So what we're talking about today, we're going to talk about why every experiment that you run should really start with a dose of empathy. Because running more tests isn't necessarily a strategy, it's more like a coping mechanism, I think. And I believe we've all got enough pressures on us without making more work for ourselves. So a little bit about me. My name is Abi Hough, and I've been working in experimentation and UX research for a really long time, but my favourite part is trying to figure out why people do what they do. I help teams run better experiments by starting off with a much better understanding of who their users are, and not necessarily adding to your pipeline of tests. What I care about most is discovering the clarity before a user actually clicks onto your website. So things like what they believe, what they trust, and what sort of upstream signals that they're receiving that are shaping their decisions. And today we're going to be talking about empathy based on evidence and not just vibes. So a brief outline of what we're going to cover so you all know where we're at. We're going to look at why experimentations feels much harder than it used to. And I think a lot of people feel this is probably true. We're going to have a look at what empathy is, or what people think it is, and what I believe it is with the work that I do. We're going to have a look at where experiments really should be starting now. And the clue is it's not on your website. It's much further upstream than that. We're going to have a look at a little bit of behavioural psychology and where it's useful and where it's actually quite awful. and look at how AI is now an actor and also an accelerant. And then we're going to have a look at the main part of this talk, which is the empathy first experiment loop. And that's going to give you some takeaways as to what you can do tomorrow. So something actionable. So we're going to start off with part one. And that's, why does experimentation feel much harder than it used to? And this is a little bit uncomfortable, like I said before. And really, it's a pattern that nobody likes to admit, because lots of teams are running more and more experiments. But somehow it feels like all of these experiments is not necessarily helping your confidence in the decisions that you're making. And sometimes your results feel quite fragile, right? These tests work until they don't. And if you try to replicate them, somehow you don't get the same results. And more often than not, I've seen that the teams that I'm working with, they tend to focus on fixing the interface. And this doesn't work when actually the problems that you're trying to solve are further upstream and not on your website. So what I'm trying to say is that more testing doesn't necessarily guarantee you more truth in what you're trying to understand, but it absolutely is going to make you more busy than ever. So why do experiments fail before they launch? Well, they're not usually going to fail because of the tools that you're using or the stats that you're looking at, or because you changed a button color. Yes, get that in there just because who doesn't mention button colors, right? But I think experiments tend to fail because the hypotheses that they were made from used untested assumptions. They tend to use proxy goals, and there's usually a mismatch between what users were promised further upstream and what they actually find on your website. And these are the arguments we kind of hide behind, but I'm going to give you an actual truth. Many conversion problems are actually contradiction problems. So let's have an example of what I mean by that. And we're going to use a checkout, okay? Pretty familiar for everybody. So if you imagine that you have a checkout and the conversion has dropped on there, teams usually tend to focus on the things they first think of. So they need to simplify it, or they need to add more reassurance, or they need to tweak the copy in that checkout. And those types of approaches might give you a couple of wins, but it doesn't really stabilize the revenue for any period of time. And the issue is that your story as a team was that you thought the user got stuck on the UI. But the reality is that user stopped believing you when they got to the checkout. So why didn't it work? Well, it wasn't the checkout that was the problem at all. The problem was the checkout was where your user lost any belief in you or your product or your website, and they cashed out. The cause of this was because the problem upstream, where the user had certain expectations met, or they found contradictions, or they identified some perceived risk. So actually, it wasn't a usability failure at all. It was a failure in belief. So this is the first exciting bit, and we should have mentioned this at the beginning. At the end of each section of the talk, I'm going to run a little poll where you guys get to tell me what you think in your situation. So the first poll, are we up and running?
Yes, we are.
Okay. Cool.
So it's time to take your vote, guys, everybody.
So the first question to all of you is, where do you think the real cause of a failed experiment most often sits within your organization or who you're working with?
I think votes are still
On-page UX and interface is leading. I like this. Yeah. Trust and clarity signals upstream. Internal decision making.
Okay.
Anybody else want to care for a vote? I feel like we should have had like some fancy countdown timer, shouldn't we? You know.
I think we've got about equal. Yeah.
Okay, so we've got typical stats. We have an even split between the answers. So 33% of you say on-page UX and interface. Same amount for trust and clarity signals upstream. And for internal decision making, I would have thought that would have got way more. That would have been my bet on that poll, right? But you know, it's
for everybody to see. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So that's really quite interesting. I guess for those of you who answered on-page UX and interface, that's a fair assumption and a fairly common one. And they're also the easiest to try and address, right? Because they're visible and measurable in an easy way. But the problem is, if we treat every problem like it's an interface problem, we can tend to ignore the failures that have formed earlier upstream. So trust and clarity. Oh, you're speaking my language. You're looking ahead into the future. So yes, I think generally trust is being formed further upstream, much more now, especially with the sort of uptake of AI use. We see AI summaries, people are using search and reviews and comparing your product long before they even get onto your website. And they inherit their impression there. And if when they land on your website, that impression isn't matched, you're going to have a problem, right? And then in terms of internal decision making, well, yeah, that's kind of a bugbear that we've all got to deal with. And that's an organizational problem as much as it is anything else. But you can use empathy to try and get around those elements as well. If we can understand why those internal decisions are being made and what is the motivation behind them, perhaps we can figure out a way to overcome them. So put your user research hat on and figure out your stakeholders and who's making the decisions to help you breach those barriers. Okay, so let's move on. Part 2. So if real failures are upstream, which we think they probably might be, we kind of need a better definition of what empathy is rather than just to be nice. It's much deeper than that. And I think empathy's got a bit of a branding problem, right? It's kind of been molded into vibes, being nice, or my personal favourite, a workshop with some sticky notes and a lot of emotional theatre. And that's kind of where I roll my eyes an awful lot. I'm surprised they are not in the back of my head from what I have seen over the years. But there are several myths around empathy. So the first myth is that empathy is basically the same as intuition. Well, I can tell you, no. That is just confidence without any kind of validation. Myth 2 is that empathy is you saying, well, we know who our users are. Again, that would be wrong. If you can't name their perceived risk, you don't know your users at all. And then myth 3, that empathy is the same as quantitative data. And I think anybody would also tell you that is a firm no, because quant tells you what happens. It doesn't tell you why that decision made sense to your user. So if it's all of those 3 myths, what is actually empathy? Well, empathy should be an evidence-based understanding of the following things. Context, what is their situation? Constraints, what's limiting them? Motivations, what job are they actually trying to get done? Perceived risks, what could potentially go wrong? and belief, what they think is true when they actually arrive onto your website. So if you think of empathy like that, empathy doesn't become a sentiment. It's actually about reducing risk. And empathy starts well before the first click, as we just discussed. Your users don't arrive with a neutral opinion. They arrive with beliefs that have been formed by things like ads, emails, and affiliates, search snippets, comparison pages, reviews and social proof ecosystems, and increasingly, like we mentioned, AI summaries and answer engines. So what does this look like in reality? Well, in our reality, when we're trying to deal with all of this, well, it's something that I've coined the term as an upstream scan. And this is where we find these upstream beliefs. So you can do things like search your key queries, brand and category and reviews, for example. And you need to be noting things like the promise that's being made in those upstream elements. So speed, price, ease, guarantees. And then you need to check the AI summary and snippets for the story that's being told, and then compare that to the landing page reality that you have. Where are the contradictions? And if you do that, this is how you stop treating the website like it's the start of your story. It really isn't. If anything, it's the last chapter. So experiments don't start on your website. They start where your user's meaning is formed. So let's go back to our checkout example. If we start to use empathy, we can stop assuming that the goal is to complete the checkout, or that the problem is friction. And if we use the empathy, we can surface things like the user's goal to avoid regret, avoiding hassle, avoiding getting burnt, and that the drop is a rational response to a perceived risk created upstream. So empathy doesn't add feelings, but it does remove the blind spots that you might have. So we're going to go to poll number 2. And your question this time is, when users abandon, what's most often true in your world? So hopefully the poll will be started.
It started. It's on the screen.
Excellent. I like these polls. We should have just done the entire hour full of polls. That could have been really interesting. What options have they got? They couldn't do it, a usability failure. They didn't want it, the wrong offer or fit. They didn't believe it. It was a trust or clarity failure. They got distracted, timing and context. I usually fit that category, I've got to admit. Doing too many things at once.
Okay, let's give it like another 5 seconds and okay, so here are the results.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't want it, they didn't believe it.
Ah, at least we've got 2 forerunners, not a sort of third split this time, so that's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm surprised they couldn't do it. Here's one. It didn't get any votes at all, but that's fine. Okay, so they didn't want it, wrong offer. Yeah, I guess I can see the validity in saying that. So you have to start questioning yourself, how did they get to a point where they didn't want it, wrong offer fit? So how have they gone from a Google search all the way to your website, to your checkout, and then thought, no, this is just not the right thing for me, right? There's a mismatch between what they found out and what they finally discovered when they got to your website. They didn't believe it. Again, yeah. I don't think that people are generally confused. I think they're just really cautious. So that's the signaling problem again, right? Because caution is rational. And if users are forming that trust upstream, the site then inherits the consequences of what they've discovered. So you need to look at trying to match those two up much better. And then they got distracted and timing. Yeah, that's a massive reality. If you start using empathy, you can try and understand what else is competing for their attention. And you can start looking at designing the experiments that reduce a decision cost for that user. So it's not making them second guess the decision that they're about to make. And again, that's around matching up how they've come into your website with those expectations. And when they get there, reducing their, oh, hang on a minute, this isn't what I wanted. So it's just trying to, yes, it's trying to reduce that decision cost, not just the number of clicks it takes them to get to it. Interesting. Okay, so let's move on to part 3. So we have a definition of empathy, but it's not much use unless it changes behavior, right? So how can we use it to change the way that we are experimenting before we even come up with a test, during a test, and after a test, and when we inevitably have to repeat that entire process? So empathy isn't really a value. We want to think of it more like an input. And if we do that, we can improve our hypothesis quality, our experiment design, the metrics that we choose to measure our experiments with, interpretation as well. And if we don't use it, experimentation tends to become an extremely expensive guessing game, optimization theatre. We do it to look dramatic and show our worth. And a lot of times we're forced into that situation because we have to show a return on investment for the people that we're working with, right? But what it can also result in is local wins, but global losses. Because if empathy is what we've said it is, which is context and risk and belief, then it also has to show up in how we design our experiments. So how are we going to do that? Let's take a look. So before we even earn the right to run a test, and before we write our hypothesis, we need to understand what belief does that user have and what can they bring in. What risks are they actually trying to avoid, and what contradictions might they be reacting to? So some fast empathy signals that we can look at, things like support tickets and complaint themes, on-site feedback, you know, everybody's favorite question, what's the one thing that stopped you checking out today? You could do 5 to 8 short user conversations and have a look at session replay, but in context, right? Not just looking at rage click voyeurism, even though that's a lot of fun. And we need to do something, the upstream scan that we've just talked about. And that's going to tell you what we are known for out there. So what does this actually look like? Turning these human signals into a better hypothesis. So you might have a ticket theme that says, I don't trust those delivery dates. And the feedback might be, why is the delivery suddenly, I don't know, 100 quid, whatever? But the result is, if we look at it this way, the hypothesis shifts from friction and actually then turns to belief and risk. And by doing this, it shows you how to stop using hypotheses to test the wrong thing and in the wrong context. So what about during our tests? Well, we need to check if we are changing an interface or if we are changing a belief. Are we measuring proxies because the real outcome is politically hard? So that's asking that difficult question. Do we choose a metric which we think we can easily justify, I don't know, add to basket, conversion rate, or do we choose a metric which is much more difficult to define and perhaps politically more sensitive to mention? And are we trying to fix any confusion that we've created upstream? Because you can't name the belief that you're trying to change. You're not actually testing, you're just redecorating your website. And once we've run the test based on those things, we need to ask ourselves, did we learn something that's transferable? Or did we just win a local narrow test that won't survive contact with reality or indeed replication? I'd love to know how many people have actually managed to replicate their experiment result. I would raise my brow. I don't think many are actually able to be replicated on the same level with the same results. And what does this experiment actually teach us about risk and belief, and not just our user interface? Because these local uplifts can be a global trust leak. And what does a trust leak look like? Well, I'll give you an example. You might add more urgency onto the right now, but what that might result in is more regret and then more returns and support queries. You might optimize the flow, and that's fine, but now your flow has a lower comprehension rate, which means you get higher cancellations. Or you might get higher conversions today, but because of your trickery, you end up with lower trust tomorrow. And as a side note, this kind of activity is basically how you'll kill your attention. So let's look at our checkout example again. So the before inputs. An upstream scan finds that contradictions in the delivery policy, the returns policy, the pricing, and any other claims. And your human signals confirm where that doubt starts. So your hypothesis now becomes reduce the perceived risk created upstream, and it isn't make the checkout easier. And this also means that your experiments start to shift, right? So now they are earlier in the journey, so you can create that clarity and consistency. You also now have metrics you can map to a belief with the confidence signals and not just clicks. But as we know, not everything is about e-commerce. So how does this look, for example, on trial signups? So your interface story might be, the form is too long. But the reality is, it's a fear of spam, unclear limits, what happens after the trial. So we can apply an empathy fix and clarify those terms and reduce the perceived sales risk before the form. And if you take this approach, you're now testing belief and not just your UI. So the next poll is about to happen. And this time the question is, where does your experiment process most often lose your user's context? So your choices are hypothesis creation, because we guessed. During experiment design, we tested the wrong thing. Measurement, we used the wrong metrics. Or interpretation, we forced a story after the fact. We've got a massively honest audience here.
That's awesome. Let's give him another.
I love that. Yeah.
All right.
I think that's a pretty solid result, right?
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for thank you all for your honesty. And yeah, I mean, my guess is, sometimes you think, oh, I've got to write a hypothesis, and yeah, it turns into one paragraph of something that vaguely resembles what you're trying to do, but who knows, right? yeah, we're all absolutely guilty of that. And I am surprised that interpretation we forced a story after the fact was also not voted for, because I'll own up that I have previously done that in the past if it fitted my narrative. So I will confess to that. But yes, but the good news is there is a freebie with this webinar that's going to help you with your hypothesis creation. So hopefully you'll get better experiments out of it. So wait till the end. Excellent. Okay. So part 4, and we're going to talk about behavioral psychology, which is a very useful servant and also a terrible master. So how can we use behavioral psychology and empathy in the correct way? So why do we love these behavioral frameworks? Well, it's quite straightforward, really, because they tend to give us, if I can get this thing to click, they tend to give us easy language that we can relate to, some shortcuts to perhaps put in our poorly formed hypotheses. It sounds valid. And also, it allows us to give a rational explanation to something. And as humans, we absolutely love a rational story, even when it's not true, which is a contradiction itself, because as humans, we are naturally irrational, right? You only have to look at America to see how that plays out. So what are 3 common myths about popular behavioral psychology? Let's take a look. Myth number 1. Cognitive load is basically, we'll just simplify everything. That's not right, because it should be reducing uncertainty at a moment that actually matters. Myth number 2. Loss aversion is basically add urgency everywhere. And we all know that CRO went through a phase of very much doing lots of this, and it was a terrible idea. So it's not just add urgency, it's about reducing the perceived downside or regret for the user. And myth number 3. Social proof is basically sprinkle reviews everywhere. Again, that's not right, no. It's about proving relevance and credibility for this user at this time. So behavioral psychology helps us to generate a hypothesis, but we need to use empathy to calibrate them into context. So we go back to our checkout example. If we don't use empathy and we only focus on our poor understanding of behavioral psychology, it all starts to become theatre. We add urgency, we add more reviews, we try to reduce steps, okay? None of this might work. But if we add empathy as well, it can be a bit more precise. So we might be able to reduce the uncertainty at a moment of doubt, reduce a downside or regret before the checkout, or prove credibility for this user in this particular context. So frameworks become useless when they replace evidence, but empathy is going to help you pull yourself back to reality. And now we have another poll. Well, that's a quick fire round. And the question this time is, how is behavioral psychology used in your experimentation practice today?
And you should have the options on your screen now.
Okay, so your options are: rarely, we don't bother. We use it to brainstorm hypotheses. We try to use it to justify decisions after the fact. Or as a rule book, we apply it everywhere. I think this is like the best cohort of honest optimizers I've ever come across. I love it. Yeah, so 83% of you said rarely or not at all. And honestly, I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It's probably better not to use it than to use it badly. but you can still look at how empathy can help you use it in a better way. But, you know, just stay anchored to, oh, you get to see my dog now as well. There she is. Just try and anchor it to risk and belief. And we had 16% of people say to justify decisions after the fact. Yeah, again, a bit like the last poll. I think we've all probably been there where perhaps the quant side of it weren't firm enough, and we needed to look for other reasons behind why we wanted to consider this test to be a win for whatever reason that might be. You can use it as a sort of post-rationalization generator, but we've all been there. But if you use empathy as well, it can help you ground your story in evidence rather than just copy and paste. That seems like a good idea and that will do approach. Okay, so let's move on to part 5. Artificial intelligence as an actor and an accelerant. And I'm sure everybody's sick of seeing AI, but it'd be remiss of me not to mention it at all. So I thought I'd best add in a section. So let's get started. So from your user's point of view, AI is now an upstream actor and a decision influencer, okay? It's beginning to shape how people discover you and what they believe about you, and whether they trust you enough to even click through to what you're trying to sell. Interesting exercise that I did was I asked AI about me, and yeah, if anybody wants their soul sadly destroying, you should do the same thing. It's quite an interesting exercise, but it gives you an idea about how people might be searching for your product rather than you as a person. Yeah, give it a go, see what you think. So yes, whether they trust you enough to even click. And AI summaries will basically kill your clicks. We've already got evidence that this is what is happening, because according to the Pew research done in 2025, 18% of Google searches now produce an AI summary. And if that AI summary appears, people tend to click less. And almost all of the people never bother to click on any of the cited sources that AI produce. And those sources that it cites are most often Wikipedia, YouTube, and Reddit. You know what's not on that list? Your carefully branded pages, okay? So you need to think about this in terms of how people are discovering you. And when it comes to teams, AI is both useful and powerful and not necessarily a good choice. So let's explore that. Where I found AI to be genuinely helpful in experimentation is pattern surfacing across qualitative feedback, faster synthesis. So what is all of this stuff telling me? Drafting variants and hypothesis options, and clustering objections into themes that you can test, which all sounds brilliant, but there is a real danger, and that is scaled wrongness. Because AI's superpower is amplification, right? So if your assumptions are wrong, AI is going to help you scale them beautifully. So AI might not necessarily create clarity, but it will accelerate whatever clarity or confusion already exists. And this is a skill set around prompting, how you prepare the information that you're processing with it. So just a word of warning, be careful. So how does this look with our checkout example? So if we've got AI helping us, but we don't have any empathy, you might get something like, it generates 50 checkout UI tests that you can possibly run today. And you scale this as a plausible activity. But what you might ultimately end up doing is basically optimizing a crime scene, okay? But if we add empathy in, You can use AI to cluster upstream doubts about deliveries, returns, reputation, and claims. And you can prioritize the contradictions that you've discovered and that you need to resolve. And then you only accelerate clarity where you have a belief that is formed. So empathy helps you decide what you will accelerate in your experimentation program. Okay, next question. What are you currently using AI in experimentation, if at all? And you have choices. Not using it yet, copy and variant generation, insight synthesis, feedback surveys and interviews, or hypothesis generation and prioritization. Be honest. You might be like me. I use it every single day now. I used to hate AI.
Pretty much use it for everything.
Well, it might be TMI for our audience, but go through the menopause. It's like my second brain right now. It's just like, yeah, I can't remember anything anymore.
Okay, folks, another 5 seconds, and then we'll call in the results. Okay, so that's copy and variant generation.
Okay. So 16% not using it yet. I'd be interested to know why. What is that? I wonder why people are not using it yet. Maybe they were like me. They just, probably like me, thought it was terrible and then started using it and got addicted, right? Yeah. Okay, copy and variant generation. I kind of get why 66% of users would say that, because it's a fairly common starting point and it's quite low risk and highly convenient. My only warning would be is just make sure you're not generating like 100 variants of the wrong message. So this goes back to ensuring you're using your empathy signals and your human signals and your upstream scans to make sure those variants are actually relevant. Insight, synthesis, and feedback, 16%. As a user researcher, I find that interesting that it's only 16% of you. I think it's one of the strongest features of AI for what I use it for. We've just got to remember that as the human element of that, we've got to be accountable for meaning and nuance rather than just taking what it produces as verbatim. It still requires human oversight. Okay, so the final part 6. And this is your takeaway for what you can do tomorrow. And I've given it a really catchy name called the Empathy First Experiment Loop. I know, that took me ages to think of that. But it also involves a lovely classical diagram of all the different stages. And we're going to go through these separately, but this is just to give you an overview. And it starts with an assumption audit. What are we taking for granted? An upstream signal scan. What did the users see or learn before arriving? How to do a human signal check. So what evidence do we have about context, constraints, motivation, and risk? How that affects experimentation design. So what belief or behavior are we trying to change, and why are we using this particular metric? And then a learning review. What did we learn that transfers beyond this one test? So the assumption audit, or name the guess before you test it. And this is for you to look at your top 3 assumptions behind any particular hypothesis that you've come up with. And also to try and figure out what would falsify each of those assumptions, what would prove them wrong. And to figure out if we're optimizing for the right outcome and not just a proxy metric that we usually tend to fall back on. Okay, an upstream signal scan, step 2. So this is what story did they absorb before they even landed here? And we need to be doing things like checking ads, snippets, and AI summaries and review for the promises that we're making. And then we need to try and figure out the contradictions of what we've just looked at versus the on-site reality. So how do they conflict with each other? And then we need to identify the belief that the user carries when they arrive on your website. And then moving on to step 3, the human signal check. So we need to borrow the user's brain for just 5 minutes. And we need to try and pull out one fast signal. So it might be those support tickets, your feedback that you're gathering, maybe having calls with, what sounds a bit old-fashioned, but yes, calls, phone calls, or interviews with some of those users, or watching your session replays. We need to then capture their objections in human language. So what if, or I'm not sure. There's much more meaning behind those if you start pulling them into context. And name the risks that they are trying to avoid. Is it regret? Is it hassle? Is it a hidden cost? There are many, many risks, and it's worth cataloguing each of those risks as they reveal themselves. So you almost have a dictionary of risk, and to be able to refer back to that. And then when it comes to experiment design, we're designing for the moment of doubt. That's the key point. So we need to define the belief shift from X to Y. So they currently believe X, but we need them to believe Y. How do we do that? And then we need to change the smallest thing that reduces that uncertainty up to the point where the hesitation shows up. And then choosing the right metric that maps that belief and adds guardrails. Always need to have guardrails on. That's not just relevant to this talk, whatever experiment that you're running, there needs to be guardrail metrics so you can closely monitor what's going on. And that's also going to help you identify any of those global trust leaks that we talked about earlier. And then final step is the learning review, where we turn results into transferable rules. So what did we learn about the belief, risk, or context of our user? So don't just say something like variant B1, ask what did we learn about this in the context? What can we reuse? Did it vary by channel, segment, or intent? What does it tell us? We need to look at what segments and channels behave differently. Why did they behave differently? What is the reason? How can we understand those differences in behavior? And then we need to look at what the next step is. Are we going to ship this test? Are we going to iterate it? Or are we going to investigate upstream for even more contradictions? And if that all sounds like a bit too much for tomorrow, there's a 1-hour version that you can do. So write your next hypotheses in belief language. Add one upstream check. So what are you promising out there? Have a look, start investigating it. Add one human signal, support ticket themes, feedback, quick calls, whatever it might be. Add one signal from those. And decide what would falsify your hypothesis, not what would confirm it. Because if we can do all of that, and I hope what this talk has kind of tried to get the point across, is that empathy isn't a vibe. It's actually how you stop running expensive experiments on the wrong problem. And on that note, we have one final poll. And the question this time to all of you is, what's one thing you'll change after today? And you have, I think I added more options. Yes, I added that one in, didn't I? So what's the one thing you'll change after today? Add a human signal before writing a hypothesis. Add an upstream signal scan. So what are people saying about you? You're going to stop shipping proxy tests that don't map to any real outcomes, or you're going to have a look at all your past wins and see what a transferable learning is, not just an uplift, or you're going to change your job. Oh, nobody's voted for my favourite yet. I'm disappointed.
I was really looking forward to that as well.
Can I vote on it?
All right. Let's keep them coming. Let's give it another 5 seconds. Okay. Yeah, I think we have a winner.
We have a winner. Okay, add an upstream signal scan. Excellent. I mean, I'm hoping this talk might have had something to do with that decision, but it's definitely something that we all need to start taking much seriously when it comes to our optimization work, stepping out of our website boxes and going out into the wild. So you're all on the right track, I would say, to being better optimizers and future-proofing your own skill sets if you can start working on this upstream stuff. For those of you, we got 25% on stop shipping proxy tests. So yeah, it's easy to shove out a test that you're quite comfortable with. Maybe if you're in an agency or you work with multiple clients and you've done one thing and it kind of worked all right, so you think, I've got a quota to meet this month, I'm just going to do that instead. Or again, it's really easy to fall into that trap, and there are multiple reasons why it happens, and that is no blame on the people running it out. There's a lot of pressures when you're in charge of experimentation programs, so I do understand that, but it stops you answering the harder questions, and ultimately it's kind of, you'll get decreasing returns on that approach. So it's really worthwhile taking on these harder types of experiments, because you'll ultimately get more learnings. You might not get more wins, but you're definitely going to get more learnings, which will over time help you build up that library of knowledge and information that will ultimately help you get those tests that will give you the wins and keep everybody happy. So good for you to stop shipping them out. It will pay off, I promise, eventually. And then hopefully you won't have to change your vote to changing your job, which nobody voted for, which I'm still disappointed about, but but never mind. Okay. So that's kind of the end of the webinar. As we mentioned, there is a free sort of template, hypothesis template, and a working example of that on this link here. Please it's just a Google Doc, so just make a copy of it, download it, do as you will, and I hope it's of some use for the people that we've got here. And that's me, I'm done.
Thank you so much, Avi. That was fantastic. I loved how you spoke about how empathy is understanding context, any constraints that might be there, user motivation, what are the perceived risks, beliefs, right? And if you can't put a pin on the belief that you're trying to change, then it's not testing. And I love how you said it's decorating. I absolutely love that. And I also, like, to make it easy for everybody who's joined, I am also adding her freebie link in the chat. You should have it now. So, make use of that. I will also share a recording of this webinar early next week along with this freebie link. So in case you're not able to grab it now, you should have it in your email early next week. Now, since we've got, a little bit of time, let's see if anybody's got questions in chat. Yeah, we've got one, Abby, for you. How do you decide which user pain points are worth prioritizing the test for?
Well, it's quite straightforward, really. It's the ones that appear the most often. So by volume, primarily, by volume, and priority. And priority is determined by how much potential revenue that particular pain point is losing across channels. So yeah, it's both of those things combined. If I don't know, let's give an example. Say you had a pain point of you said the delivery was free on the product page, yet now I get through to the check. You say your delivery was free and I'd have it by tomorrow on your product page, yet when I get through the checkout, it's saying I have now not met the minimum threshold for free delivery and actually you won't deliver it until next week. I would consider that a sizable pain point, with probably affecting quite a few users. So it would be quite easy to fix that. It's just messaging on the product page. You just say the truth rather than promising a lie. It's not difficult to change copy to be in line with actually what's expected when that user hits the checkout point. So really, it's a twofold step. It's one, mapping all of those individual pain points, and the only way you can do that realistically is by doing your user research, and that covers all of the stuff we've talked today. So what messages are they getting upstream in terms of how they expect or what they expect when they land on your website? All of those, session recordings that you've got stacked in Hotjar or Clarity or whatever that you haven't looked at for 6 months, even though it's running, start having a look through those to try and quantify. In the example that I gave, speak to the customer service, have a look at the chat logs from the website. Even the search terms, are people kind of like searching for, the FAQs on delivery? Does it say they're trying to answer their own questions, like why is this site contradicting itself? All of that will help you quantify what these pain points are, and in my experience, you're going to end up with quite a sizable list. For most websites, it is not going to be, oh, there's just one or two sticking points here and there. Actually, even if you just took a polarized view of a very strict linear funnel throughout the website, which we all know isn't the case, it's a lie, you're going to end up with a sizable list of pain points for most users. So yeah, that's how I would be prioritizing. When do we use AI? In terms of how, tell me, using AI for what? Is that Kit Joseph? Yeah? Want to expand on your question a little bit?
I had, since Kit has already brought up something on AI, while, they share more details on their questions, I had a question for you, Abby. Now, since everybody's on, AI, and since that's like the most talked about features in any product, right? And also me, who pretty much starts her day with AI, right?
It's the first thing you open, right? I know it.
Exactly. Right. Even before, I have my coffee, there's something that's in my head, some random thought, and I'm literally on AI just asking questions like it's my personal therapist, right? So now AI is so great, in telling us what really happened, in the data, right? But it most often just hallucinates when it has to tell you why, because it really doesn't give you the right answer. It's just like all sorts of reasoning of why it might have happened. So how do you suggest we use AI to analyze, user sentiments? Because that's where, we need to look into to actually understand what's not working, right? To even bring in a decent hypothesis, something that would actually, bring an impact. So how do you suggest we use AI to analyze user sentiments without losing, the empathy that you just spoke about, that would
Yeah.
drive a breakthrough hypothesis?
Yeah, so I think there are some guardrails that you can put in for yourself when you're using AI. So I'm talking in terms of ChatGPT because that is my agent of choice.
Yeah, yeah.
I've been using it for probably a year and a half now, but there's some harsh learnings I've had. So some of the things that I would do if I was using AI, even from an initial setup point of view, things I've learned the hard way. Within ChatGPT, you can have folders. And in those folders, you can, in the settings, define how the agent responds to you. So it's really important to have a decent organizational system in terms of the folders that you set up. So in my case, I have folders for each particular client. So, and I always turn on the settings so there's no crosstalk between folders, so they're all kept distinct. So I don't have, if I'm working for a client that's selling trainers and then I'm dealing with a client who's selling drugs or whatever, I don't get stupid answers like, oh, well, in a world where everybody's wearing bouncy trainers, they should all be, using these particular painkillers, right? So to avoid all that crosstalk, you have to get your setup right. But in those settings, if you can define your GPT as in a user research, and there's plenty of great Google examples how you can set up a profile for your GPT, that's a massive help. And the second part, I would say, is in your prompting skills. When you're asking the questions, you need to be explicit and you need to ask it to cite its sources, where it's pulling its assumptions from when you feed it in the data. And then thirdly, if you're using ChatGPT, you need to have it in thinking mode all the time, right? So if you have the option to be able to change which model it's using, always use thinking mode for when you're doing this type of research. So then if you have it in thinking mode, you set it up to think like a user researcher. And if your prompting is accurate and explicit when you ask the questions, you're much more likely to reduce the chances of it making random stuff up. When I first started using it as a naive person, I remember I fed it in a load of information and I asked it to pull out the themes and the barriers and the motivators and all of this stuff. And bear in mind, this was literally, I'd done a load of user research interviews in the morning and I was analysing the results in the afternoon. So everything everybody had said to me was fresh in my mind. And I asked it to start doing this, and I'm reading through what it's pulling out, and there's it's kind of like all this stuff where it's just made completely random connections between things. And then it was even worse than that, because it decided to put in there, various user quotes to back up what it was saying. And those user quotes were completely hallucinated. Not one of the users had said any of these quotes whatsoever. So it was lucky that I managed to clock that before I put all of this in a report, copy and paste, and just said, there you go, there's your report, because none of it would have been true. So I've learned how to be much more careful with it. And yeah, it's amazing to have a quick way to synthesize that information, but it's why I go back to that point, is that you've got to have the human oversight. So it's why I don't automate this in a workflow, because I know what the temptation would be. I'd just have a workflow go and I'd push it out to the client's Asana or whatever it might be, and I won't have looked at it. And then the client will be saying to me, oh my goodness, Abby, that was an interesting recommendation. I'll be like, what's that then? And I have no idea what it said. So
yeah.
I definitely see it as, it's kind of like, for me in my professional life, it's like an intern PA, right? It's super helpful at doing all of that long-winded work. But would I allow the PA to directly contact the client? No. I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I think that would be my top tip. Just if you are using it, spend time into, invest your time to understand how to get the most out of that tool. And there's loads of really good YouTube content about how to, you know, use these agents properly and to get the most out of them. And, you know, OpenAI are the worst. As a user researcher and a UI lover, I hate ChatGPT interface with a passion, because none of it is obvious. None of this stuff is obvious. You have to dig into the interface to find the settings. So yeah, I'd say the best investment of the time would be give yourself an hour every week to try and understand how to get the most out of these tools and skill yourself up. That would be my top tip.
Okay. Perfect. Thank you so much, Abi. And
Welcome.
Kit says that was the question that he wanted to ask. So, Kit, I've got you covered.
Well, if you have any other questions, people can quite happily drop me a message and I'll do my best to answer them. There's no point in everybody else going through the same misery as I did for the past 12 months. If I can help, I will.
Absolutely. So, yeah, I think that's about time for us. Again, I have Abi's freebie hypothesis template in the chat, so feel free to use that. And I'm also going to send you the email early next week with this freebie, as well as the recording of this webinar. So, you know, huge thanks to Abi for dropping, you know, these truth bombs, and all of you guys for hanging out. I hope
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, and I hope this inspires, you know, you to take some really interesting experiments. Again, drop feedback, you know, in the chat. Again, see you guys next time. Bye for now then.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.